For almost a century, a single man kept a secret he swore he would never reveal. A secret locked behind signed documents, government pressure, and the kind of fear that buries itself deep enough to poison a lifetime. He was one of the last witnesses to the fall of the great skyliner Aurelia, once called the Queen of the Clouds. When the Aurelia went down during its final voyage, newspapers printed tragedy. Experts blamed unexpected atmospheric ignition. The public accepted it. And the world moved on. But he didn't. On his deathbed in 2019, barely able to speak, he whispered the words that shattered 88 years of silence. They weren't passengers. They were agents. Then he said the part no historian was prepared to hear: it wasn't an accident. Those few sentences unearthed a conspiracy that had been buried beneath steel, fire, and political fear. A cover-up so deep it crossed governments, militaries, and intelligence agencies on both sides of the Atlantic. The Aurelia disaster, long thought to be a tragic engineering failure, was something else entirely. And the man who uttered those final words? He was the youngest survivor, only 13 at the time. A cabin runner. Invisible. A child no one noticed. A child who saw everything. And what he witnessed inside that floating palace is a story darker than any engineer, journalist, or official dared to put on record. Tonight, his confession finally speaks. Tonight, the truth behind the Aurelia burns its way out of the shadows. Long before it became a funeral pyre above the Atlantic, the Aurelia was a miracle of ambition. The world in the early 1930s was obsessed with going higher, faster, farther. Airships were the future, floating hotels that crossed continents in half the time of ocean liners. The Aurelia was to be the crown jewel. A vessel so large that newspapers joked it cast a shadow big enough to blot out a small village. Engineered under the direction of Dr. Albrecht Brandt, the airship stretched 816 feet from stern to bow, longer than the tallest buildings of its time. Inside its massive duralumin skeleton sat 18 colossal gas cells, enough lifting mass to carry a small town. The original design called for helium, non-flammable, stable, safe. But helium was controlled by the United States, and political tensions threw up a wall Brandt could not climb. So they turned to hydrogen. Cheaper. More powerful. And deadly. But the Aurelia was so beautiful that the dangers seemed far away. 2 full passenger decks lined with Art Deco brass and ivory. A promenade lined with glass. Private cabins with silk curtains. A grand dining hall where string quartets played during dinner. People called it Heaven's Railroad. The Sky Cathedral. The beginning of a new world. But inside the awe, inside the elegance and grandeur, the Aurelia carried something else, something Brandt warned would one day doom the ship. Something no one listened to. By the time the Aurelia prepared for its final transatlantic flight in May 1931, tensions across Europe simmered beneath a thin shell of diplomacy. Governments spied on one another. Every innovation was a weapon waiting to be stolen. And the Aurelia, luxurious as it was, held tremendous military value. Its range. Its altitude. Its ability to cross oceans silently. 3 men boarded the ship that week under false names. Their tickets looked ordinary. Their luggage passed inspection. Their smiles matched their forged identities. But they were not tourists. Later investigations revealed their real affiliations. 2 belonged to an experimental counterintelligence division. The third? No records exist for him, only fragments of an erased file. Among the crew, only 2 men suspected something unusual. First Officer Wilhelm Krantz, a strict but intuitive airman. And quietly observing from the corner of the sea-deck dining area, a child helper named Emil Hart. Emil was barely 13. A fast runner. A quick learner. Assigned to sweep hallways, deliver trays, and keep out of the way. But being invisible gave him access to everything. He watched the 3 mysterious passengers exchange coded glances. He saw them meet in off-limits sections of the ship. He overheard a tense argument between 2 of them, voices sharp enough to slice through the hum of the engines. Only many years later would he understand what he had seen. Only decades later would he realize the truth. Those men weren't protecting the ship. They were hunting someone on it. Someone who had boarded under a fourth forged identity. Someone carrying a device, small, silent, and catastrophic. The Aurelia wasn't just a luxury flight. It was a battlefield in the sky. The Aurelia lifted off from coastal France on May 12, weather, calm. Visibility, perfect. Crowds waved as the massive silver shape drifted upward like a moon forged from metal. Inside, passengers sipped champagne. The promenade filled with laughter. The captain gave his welcome speech, calm, confident. No one sensed that beneath the polished decks, pressure was coiling like a spring. On the second evening, the crew conducted a routine walk of the lower keel, a narrow metal corridor that stretched the entire length of the ship. Emile was accompanying a senior steward, carrying towels, and pretending it was part of his duties. That was when he heard it. Whispers. Footsteps. A clink of metal on metal. He and the steward peered into a maintenance compartment and saw a silhouette where no passenger was allowed. A man hunched over a strange cylindrical container. When he turned, Emile recognized him. The fourth imposter. The one the agents were hunting. The steward froze. The man froze. For a long second, the three stared at each other, suspended in fear. Then the intruder bolted past them, vanishing into the darkness of the keel. The steward tried to chase him. But Emile, young, small, unnoticed, heard something the adult didn't. A soft ticking. A faint, unnatural vibration. When Emile reported it, the officer on duty dismissed it as machinery noise. He was told to stop imagining danger. But danger didn't need imagination. It was already awake. It was already counting down. The three undercover agents realized the saboteur was active. Passengers noticed nothing. Crew noticed little more than whispers and hurried steps. But Emile saw everything. He saw First Officer Krantz escort the agents into the sealed cargo corridor. He saw them unlock a restricted map station. He watched them argue over the best way to search without panicking the passengers. By midnight, the Aurelia had reached the coldest part of the Atlantic. Wind howled outside. Inside, the temperature felt strangely heavy, as if the metal walls themselves knew something was wrong. At 1:43 a.m., an alarm bell rang softly in a crew-only stairwell. It wasn't loud enough for passengers. But the agents heard it. Krantz heard it. And Emile, awake delivering tea, heard it too. The signal came from gas cell number 6. A cell that had shown perfect readings only hours before. When Krantz climbed into the observation catwalk beneath the massive hydrogen balloon, he found something impossible, a small tear in the fabric skin. A tear too precise to be accidental. Then he found something worse, a faint chemical smell. Not from hydrogen. From an ignition compound. The agents insisted the saboteur would be near. They split up to search the upper girders. Krantz stayed below to assess the danger. Emile wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the catwalks. But he followed anyway, silent as dust. From his hiding spot behind a structural beam, he witnessed a confrontation that would haunt him for the rest of his life, Agent Rodman cornering the saboteur above the gas cell. Shouting. A struggle. A fall. And then, a spark. Tiny. Blue. Barely visible. But enough. More than enough. The Aurelia's fate was sealed in that instant. At 1:48 a.m., passengers heard a soft thump. A moment later, the entire ship lurched like a whale struck from below. From the keel, Emile saw a flash of blinding white. The gas cell erupted. A column of fire roared upward, shredding the aluminum frame. The Aurelia bucked violently. People tumbled from their beds. Plates crashed in the dining hall. The promenade windows glowed orange. Fire spread with inhuman speed, racing along the hydrogen cells like a fuse through gunpowder. One cell failed. Then the next. Then the next. The stern collapsed first. The bow shot upward as the tail lost lift. The ship tilted to almost 60 degrees. In the crew quarters, men scrambled for emergency hatches. In the passenger deck, mothers screamed for their children. Steel groaned like a dying animal as the skeleton twisted. Emil held onto a girder as flames devoured the catwalk behind him. He remembered one thing from training: find the provisioning hatch at mid-keel. If all else fails, jump. He ran. The fire chased him, a living monster of heat and smoke. The ship's tilt threw him forward and backward as if trying to shake him off. Behind him, metal tanks burst. Girders snapped. The roar of burning hydrogen drowned out human voices. When Emil reached the provisioning hatch, he saw only black ocean beneath. 50 feet down. A fall that could shatter bones. But staying inside meant certain death. He kicked the hatch open. A gust of freezing night air hit his smoke-scorched face. He jumped. The cold water swallowed him like a fist. Above him, the Aurelia, once the pride of the skies, folded in half as fire consumed its center. A giant made of silver and dreams crumpled into a burning cross of collapsing metal. The ocean boiled where burning debris hit the waves. Survivors jumped from portholes, from windows, from torn metal. Some swam. Some sank. Some yelled prayers that vanished in the roar of the blaze. Within 54 seconds, the Aurelia went from floating palace to flaming wreck. 53 lives were lost. 39 survived. And a government took control of the narrative before dawn. Minutes after rescue boats reached the survivors, military officers boarded the scene. Before journalists. Before investigators. Before anyone could ask questions. Bodies were covered. Debris was hauled away. And every survivor was ordered to remain silent until statements could be taken. Emil, shivering, coughing seawater, was separated from the others. Not because he was a child, but because someone realized he had been in the lower keel. Where the ignition had begun. Where the agents had fought. For hours he sat in a dim cabin, wrapped in blankets. A man in an officer's uniform questioned him gently at first. Then firmly. Then coldly. What did you see? Did you hear anything unusual? Did anyone speak to you? When Emil hesitated, the officer leaned closer. You must say nothing. Lives depend on it. Nations depend on it. He was given documents to sign. He wasn't allowed to read them. He was 13. Every survivor received a similar warning. Some resisted. Most complied. Everyone was told the same official explanation. Static discharge. Hydrogen ignition caused by atmospheric conditions. A tragic accident. Nothing more. The agents? Never mentioned in public reports. Their names scrubbed from every manifest. The saboteur? Listed as unidentified deceased male. No motive. No identity. No investigation. The Aurelia disaster became a footnote. A tragedy without villains. A story wrapped in smoke and sealed by governments that needed the world calm. But one witness carried the truth. A child who saw too much. And spent 88 years trying to forget it. Until he couldn't anymore. In 2019, Emil Hart, age 101, frail, unable to walk, asked to speak to his granddaughter alone. He knew his time was short. He wanted to let go of the memory that had burned in him longer than the Aurelia burned over the Atlantic. With trembling hands, he whispered, the fire was no accident. He described the agents. The chase. The saboteur. The struggle above gas cell number 6. The spark. His granddaughter recorded everything. 40 minutes of confession. 40 minutes of truth that rewrote history. At the end, he said one final sentence: they buried the truth because the world was not ready for the war it would have started. He died 2 days later. Peacefully. Perhaps for the first time in 88 years. His granddaughter released the recording after reviewing archived passenger lists, sealed documents, and declassified military correspondence that confirmed much of his story. Historians now believe the Aurelia disaster was likely the first act of an undeclared shadow war, one fought with spies, sabotage, and secrets too dangerous for citizens to hear. The saboteur was never identified. The agents vanished from records. But the confession stands. A dying man's truth. A truth stronger than the lies that protected nations. Today, only fragments of the Aurelia exist. A twisted beam in a maritime museum. A scorched panel in a private collection. A handful of photographs showing the ship before it burned. But its legacy is larger than metal. It's a warning. A reminder. Technology can be magnificent. Human ambition can touch the sky. But secrets can burn through steel. The story of the Aurelia now joins the handful of tragedies that changed aviation forever. The disaster ended the golden age of airships. It shifted public trust to airplanes. It forced governments to rethink silence as a weapon. But perhaps most importantly, it proves that even the smallest witness can see the largest truth. Emil Hart was a child when the Aurelia fell. A child ignored. A child underestimated. A child who survived by miracle and instinct. And in the end, it was that same child, 88 years later, who told the world why the sky burned that night. Not because of engineering flaws. Not because of weather. Not because of fate. But because men with secrets turned a miracle of metal and hydrogen into a battleground. And only one boy lived long enough to tell us. As years passed, the relationship between Melissa Gilbert and Patty Duke shifted in ways no one expected. What began as mutual admiration slowly turned into a complicated dynamic filled with misunderstandings, tensions, and unspoken resentments. The pressures of fame, the weight of the industry, and personal struggles forced their once warm connection into unfamiliar territory. By this stage, both women were navigating their own storms, making it harder to maintain the bond they once cherished. There was a specific moment, small, subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, when things began to fall apart. Melissa recalled a situation on set where Patty's reaction stunned her. It wasn't explosive, but it was sharp enough to leave a lasting scar. From that day forward, the tone of their interactions became colder, more distant, and filled with tension that neither of them openly addressed. Behind the camera, the stress was real and relentless. Melissa and Patty were both under the kind of pressure only Hollywood insiders understand: constant scrutiny, high expectations, and the fear of being replaced. These pressures didn't bring them together, instead, they slowly drove them apart. Each woman reacted differently, creating emotional distance and confusion. Sometimes the most painful things aren't said out loud. Melissa often felt judged, misunderstood, and dismissed by Patty in ways she couldn't fully explain. Meanwhile, Patty, battling her own internal struggles, often misread Melissa's intentions. Their silence became the loudest part of their story. Respect once defined their relationship, but resentment quietly replaced it over time. Little disagreements piled up, misunderstandings grew deeper, and unresolved emotions built a wall between them. Melissa later admitted that she carried feelings she never talked about, feelings that changed the way she saw Patty forever. There came a day when Melissa finally understood that her feelings were not just paranoia. Patty's behavior in a private moment was so unexpected and hurtful that Melissa could no longer ignore what she had sensed for years. This incident solidified her realization that the relationship had become toxic. Their tension didn't stay between them. Cast members, crew, and mutual friends started noticing the coldness. Some tried to step in, while others simply avoided getting involved. The once smooth atmosphere around them became uncomfortable, affecting work and friendships. Every person has a limit, and Melissa eventually reached hers. After years of trying to understand, adapt, and stay respectful, she finally realized she had to step back for her own well-being. This was the moment she emotionally detached from Patty for the first time. While Melissa suffered in silence, Patty had her own battles, emotional turmoil, personal struggles, and pressures the public never saw. Although her actions hurt Melissa, many believed Patty didn't fully grasp the impact of her behavior. Her own pain often spilled over onto others without intention. Years later, Melissa finally spoke openly about everything: the tension, the hurt, the reasons behind her complicated feelings toward Patty Duke. Her honesty shocked fans but also brought understanding and closure. For the first time, the world learned what had really been happening behind the scenes. Rumors are powerful in the entertainment world, and Melissa and Patty were not spared. Stories began circulating, some exaggerated, some completely false. Unfortunately, these rumors deepened the cracks in their relationship. Each woman started hearing things about the other that made trust nearly impossible. Instead of clearing the air, the growing gossip created distance neither of them knew how to close. Behind the public smiles, Melissa carried emotional exhaustion. The constant tension with Patty affected her confidence, her peace, and even her performance. She often wondered if she was at fault or if she simply wasn't good enough. Hollywood rarely gives space for emotional healing, leaving Melissa to deal with her pain privately. Even though the tension was visible to many around them, no one intervened. In the industry, people avoided conflict to keep their careers safe. Everyone walked on eggshells, afraid that addressing the problem would make things worse. This silence only allowed the situation to grow more toxic. Melissa hoped, deep down, that Patty would someday acknowledge the pain she caused. But that apology never came. Whether Patty was unaware, unwilling, or emotionally unable to explain herself, the moment Melissa needed never happened. This absence became one of the biggest disappointments Melissa carried. At a time when Melissa should have been celebrating one of the biggest successes of her career, her joy was overshadowed by ongoing conflict. What should have been a moment of pride became another memory tied to discomfort. Instead of feeling accomplished, she felt drained and conflicted. Someone close to Melissa finally gave her the words she needed to hear. They told her that not all relationships are meant to survive the pressures of fame, and that letting go doesn't mean hating someone. This advice shifted her mindset, helping her accept the reality instead of fighting it. With time, Melissa began to clearly see patterns she once ignored. Distance made everything make sense. She realized that many of Patty's actions came from a place of insecurity, emotional struggle, and unresolved personal issues, not intentional cruelty. This clarity brought a quiet sense of closure. Fans often notice more than celebrities expect. People watching interviews, behind-the-scenes clips, and public appearances started sensing the tension between Melissa and Patty. Questions began circulating online, adding more pressure to an already fragile situation. Eventually, Melissa made a mature and difficult decision: she chose peace. Instead of holding on to resentment or trying to fix what was beyond repair, she stepped away emotionally. This choice marked the beginning of her personal healing and emotional freedom. Years later, Melissa reflects on the experience without anger. She sees the situation with maturity, acknowledging the good moments along with the painful ones. While she admits the relationship was difficult, she also recognizes that both she and Patty were simply human, flawed, pressured, and trying their best in a complicated world. As time passed, Melissa and Patty began communicating only through silence. The distance between them wasn't created overnight, it formed slowly, layer by layer, through misunderstandings, emotional fatigue, and unspoken frustrations. Eventually, the silence felt louder than any argument they could have had. What once was an exciting partnership now felt like a fragile thread ready to break at the slightest pull. Melissa realized that sometimes distance doesn't happen because people stop caring, it happens because they care too much, and the pain becomes unbearable. In their case, stepping back became the only way they could move forward. One of the biggest hidden reasons behind their strained relationship was the constant comparison from the industry. Hollywood often placed Melissa and Patty side by side, ranking their performances, careers, personalities, and even their emotional strengths. Those comparisons created invisible competition neither woman asked for. Patty felt pressured to maintain her legacy, while Melissa struggled to step out from under that legacy. The weight of expectations pushed them into opposite corners, making genuine connection nearly impossible. In a world where the spotlight never dims, comparison can destroy relationships silently, leaving wounds neither person knows how to heal. Although Melissa moved on professionally, the emotional scars remained. She carried doubts that weren't hers to hold, questions about her worth, her talent, and her place in the industry. The conflict with Patty shook her confidence more than she initially realized. It wasn't just about one person's behavior, it was about the crushing feeling of being misunderstood and unappreciated by someone she once admired. Those emotional marks stayed with her for years, shaping how she approached future relationships in Hollywood. Healing wasn't immediate, it came slowly, through reflection, maturity, and a willingness to forgive without receiving an apology. While Melissa suffered quietly, Patty battled inner storms that the public never witnessed. Behind her strong personality were years of emotional hardship, personal trauma, and mental health challenges. These internal battles often spilled into her interactions with others, even when she didn't intend to cause harm. Her behavior toward Melissa was shaped by a lifetime of unresolved pain, a pain she never fully learned how to manage. Understanding this years later helped Melissa see the situation with more compassion. Patty wasn't a villain, she was a deeply complex woman fighting battles no one fully understood. There was a day when Melissa unexpectedly saw a vulnerable side of Patty, a moment so raw it shifted her entire perspective. Patty, usually guarded and controlled, suddenly broke down during a private conversation. The frustration, fear, and emotional exhaustion in her words revealed a woman desperately trying to stay strong in a world that constantly demanded more from her. It was in this moment that Melissa realized Patty's harshness wasn't always intentional, sometimes, it was a shield. This fleeting moment of truth stayed with Melissa for years, reminding her that even the strongest people can be deeply fragile. Hollywood thrives on drama, not just on screen, but behind the scenes too. Executives, journalists, and even other actors quietly fueled the tension between Melissa and Patty because it created buzz. Small disagreements were exaggerated, innocent moments twisted into scandals, and private conversations turned into public speculation. Instead of supporting their collaboration, the industry used their conflict as entertainment. The two women became unwilling participants in a narrative that neither of them chose. This exploitation only deepened the wedge between them, making genuine reconciliation harder than ever. Years later, something shifted inside Melissa. It wasn't triggered by an apology or a dramatic confrontation, it came from within. She reached a point where holding on to old pain no longer served her. She learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnecting with someone, sometimes it simply means releasing the weight they left behind. This realization became her turning point. She stopped viewing Patty as the cause of her pain and instead saw her as a complicated human being shaped by her own struggles. With this new understanding, Melissa reclaimed the emotional peace she had long lost. Despite everything that happened, Melissa often thought about what she would say to Patty if they ever had a true, honest conversation. She wouldn't confront her with accusations or blame, instead, she'd express the hurt, the confusion, and the moments that still lingered in her memory. She'd tell her that she admired her talent, respected her legacy, and wished things had been different. Most importantly, she'd tell her that forgiveness had already been given, not for Patty's sake, but for Melissa's own healing. These unspoken words became part of Melissa's quiet closure. When Melissa finally shared the truth about her complex relationship with Patty, the world was stunned. Fans who admired both women had no idea what had been happening behind the scenes. Her honesty didn't come from bitterness, it came from maturity. She spoke with clarity, compassion, and emotional honesty, painting a full picture without diminishing Patty's humanity. The revelation sparked discussions about mental health, pressure in Hollywood, and the unseen burdens actors carry. For the first time, audiences saw the full reality behind a relationship they once believed was perfect. In the end, the story of Melissa Gilbert and Patty Duke isn't defined by conflict, it's defined by resilience, growth, and emotional truth. Both women carved their own paths in Hollywood, leaving behind legacies that continue to inspire millions. Their complicated relationship serves as a reminder that even the brightest stars struggle with darkness at times. What matters most is how they rise above it. Melissa emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Patty left behind a legacy of iconic performances and undeniable talent. And together, their story stands as a powerful testament to the complexity of human relationships.